James West is an interesting individual, got an interesting background. He started off in the finance industry, um, got interested and ended up buying a healthcare lab. Some things happened in terms of his market for that healthcare lab, and he did a 180. He turned it into a biomedical genetics lab. That genetics lab did some incredible things in terms of um, being cutting edge, and they actually started the major focus on haptoglobin testing. Now, James also has done some work in Medicare Advantage. I did some work with him in that. But here's what's interesting about James. He just this past week decided to start a diet. So he agreed for me to interview him to talk a little bit about what motivated him to do a diet and what some of the things are that he's thinking about, how he's going to do the diet, how he's going to keep a structure around that, how he's going to keep his family updated and participating with him, and some of the things he may do to document his results. So this is an interview with a friend, associate, and sometimes patient of mine, a fellow named James West. I met James a few years ago back with the Bail Deneen community meetings. At the time, he was running a genetics lab. He has also been involved in managed care and was actually the one that got me started in Medicare Advantage. I've done a couple of videos on that as well. James contacted me this past week and said, "Ford, I think I'm getting ready to start a diet." And actually texted me this morning and said, "I've started it." So it's an interesting time when somebody gets started on a diet because it's a huge change in terms of lifestyle. And I asked James if he'd be available or willing to give some of his thoughts. There are two or three major components I wanted to cover with you, James. One is, some of the labs and the potential labs that you talked about getting as you go into this diet, maybe a before and after. That's a different discussion. Also wanted to talk with you about the definition of a diet. You gave, as we discussed before the video, you gave me an interesting definition and sort of threw me for a second, but I think at the end of the day, we'll get a lot of clarity regarding how to define the diet. And I think that for those of our viewers who are interested, it'll probably teach them some things as well. We can all learn from it. But for this video, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about preparation. There's a whole lot of focus in preventive medicine and behavior change on readiness to change. And you go through a lot of different layers and episodes in terms of getting ready to make that kind of lifestyle change. One is you're not there. Maybe you've heard of it, just not an issue. Another is, you started thinking about it, but it's not the time. Another is, you know what? I think I'm going to have to get serious and do this. And then yet another one is, okay, I've made my plans. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. And this is the time I'm going to pull the trigger. And then a fourth one is, or yet another timing, and that is, okay, I'm started. You're in that, okay, I'm started phase. But if you could just give us a little bit of perspective regarding some of the thought processes you went through in terms of getting ready, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Ford. Thanks for having me on. I started, I think I called you last week after I did a blood pressure test at one of the local pharmacies. I went and picked up some pharmacy for my wife and took a typical blood pressure, and it was either the machine was broke, I really needed to do something, and you assured me that I probably needed to do something. So the motivation was there. My wife had a baby 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the typical, that looks good, honey. Let me have 2 shares of whatever you're eating, that most husbands do. Because I'm older, it just, you just couldn't run it off, not as active lifestyle to drop it as quickly as our wives can. So my motivation was twofold. One, being a little bit older than the typical young dad, I wanted to get into better health. And then secondly, realizing, I've got these health issues that undoubtedly have popped up as I've gained my baby weight. I need to do something about it. And so reached out to you. I think the reason reach out to your doctor or someone like that is somebody that can make you accountable to how you're behaving.
Yeah. I had a patient once refer to that baby weight that you just mentioned as being a bottom feeder. He said, I have to tell you, Doc, I'm a bottom feeder. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, we make all kinds of food for the kids, like we'll take them to McDonald's or something. But
Right.
then when they don't, and they never finish it, but when they don't, I'm always coming in batting cleanup.
That's right. That's right. What my 4-year-old can eat and metabolize very quickly doesn't work so well for me. And Chick-fil-A is fantastic. I just want you to know it's not just that I'm bottom feeding, but it's chicken nuggets are fantastic. I don't care what French fries, man, that stuff's delicious.
I know how you feel. I did a little of that last night with myself. My family went out to a local chicken place called Cane's. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I couldn't resist. I had one myself.
Well,
Tell us a little bit about your background, James. You're not your average patient. You know a little bit more about the biomedical area, and I referred to it earlier, but again, just tell us a little bit more about your experience in the biomedical area. I think it'd be helpful for people to realize your perspective, your filters that you're looking through.
7 or 8 years ago, now we launched a genetics lab here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm from, and it really focused in prevention. That's where, as you said, that's where you and I met. We're focused on genetic markers of inflammation, genetic markers associated with diabetes, heart disease. We would do, and we could do any of the labs that are typical standard labs, but we really focused in that area, both biomarkers as well as genetic markers. So in leading that company required me to become very familiar with the marketplace and the providers around the country like yourself who are national thought leaders. And so I became very aware of the impact that inflammation has, and how lifestyle impacts it more. But genetics and lifestyle combined, you can really, negatively have a negative impact. And learned a lot from you, doctors like Ryan McWhorter, Brad Bell, Amy Doneen. So I had a real good understanding, having kind of led a company that was really on the forefront. As a matter of fact, some of the genetics that you really proposed, like the haptoglobin, Brad Bell approached me several years ago because labs were unable to figure out how to measure that test on a genetic level. They could do it at serum level. And we took that task on, and I guess we're still the only commercial, or they are the only commercial lab. I divested of the labs. The pharmaceutical company bought that lab a couple of years ago, and I went into the network business, healthcare network business. But we were the only lab doing that haptoglobin test, probably still are on the genetic level, and a few other proprietary tests as well. So very familiar with the impact that your genetics has when combined with your lifestyle. Lifestyle's the worst. I would say you would agree with that. Your lifestyle can improve on your genetics or it can exacerbate your genetics, but your genetics do have a role, and understand how that impacts, particularly in my own life, because I was always the guinea pig. If there's ever a new test out, we'd find a way to get someone to prescribe and look at our own numbers. So well familiar with too familiar with my genetics, as a matter of fact.
Coming from that perspective, I think one of the big issues that we're looking at these days, and I know you and I have talked briefly about this in the past, one of the companies that you've worked with in the past and did a joint venture with. I can't remember the name of them right now, but epigenetics is a huge issue right now. You know, we have the same genetics when we're 20, and we don't have type 2 diabetes that we have when we're 60, and we do have type 2 diabetes. And it's because of how we access those genes. Given your background, your perspective, do you see anything big coming up in terms of methylation, being able to look at genes and their actual use? When I'm talking about methylation, I'm not talking about methyfer. I'm talking about more of the methylation of the DNA itself and epigenetics.
Yeah, I still stay fairly connected in the field, and I think you're going to see a number of markers break through that do exactly that, that understand not only what your genes are, but how are they expressed. And how does, as you describe it, your epigenetics, how does my behavior impact the expression of that gene? And the problem in the marketplace, unfortunately, and if anybody listening can do anything about it, is getting payors to pay, and then getting physicians to take the time to explain how the two worlds connect. A perfect example is I may have genetics for inflammation. I do, as a matter of fact. But if you took one of the breakthroughs we learned several years ago was, let's say I have the genetics for inflammation, and I don't brush my teeth, I don't take care, I don't floss, I don't do the things that I should do for something as simple as oral health, then I exacerbate my genetics towards that inflammation and can create an environment in which my behavior impacts more negatively even than my genetics. And so that's a perfect example where the expression of those genes can be kind of kept at bay by me, you know, being very mindful of my oral health and taking care of my mouth. And that was one of those moments that I think was the lab we were partnering with and developing some of those tests, that you really can impact in a positive way what may be at risk in a negative way.
Speaking of epigenetics and the impact of behavior, I'm going to go back and share some of my own experiences recently. I don't know that I told you. Just over the past couple of months, I've lost about 10 pounds. And I did that by doing more of a full-blown water fast, 2 days a week for the past 8 weeks. We went to Europe for a couple of weeks, so I didn't do it that week, those 2 weeks. But the other weeks I have. Here's what motivated me. Back to the issue of readiness to change. I've shared with you before, and I've shared with the viewers that I have atrial fib. I was doing a lot of travel with that company you introduced me to, Physician Partners. We were doing some work in the Pensacola area. I was traveling with EL and Rajiv, Dr. Patel, eating too much, maybe drinking a little too much, and you know, your typical road trip kind of environment. I slowly crept over 160. And it's really weird. I've never seen this in the literature, but I just know this from my own experience. As soon as I start getting over 160 pounds, I start getting these episodes of atrial fib. The episodes start cranking back up. So that's a major motivator for me. Right. Can you go back, give us a little bit more insight on what got you across that decision horizon?
Yeah, I think it was reading a high blood pressure, looking at that readout and saying, boy, I won't tell you what the number was because my wife may watch this later, but it was high. I mean, you know, knowing what I know, I knew, you know, I texted you right away and said, boy, look at this number. And so I think it's that reality that you're right. There is some decision point. I've done this before, you know, I've crept up before just like you, and, you know, you get serious about it. But I think it's when you feel it, you know, when you feel lousy and you can feel those pressure headaches and you don't fit in your clothes. I laugh. It is actually a pretty strong motivator when you go to put on, you know, pair of pants and they won't fit well, and you just go, I just spent $120 for these pants a month or so ago. I'm too cheap to buy another pair. It's when you go, all right, I'm gonna have to lose the weight. And some people have different personalities. I have one of those personalities. Once I make up my mind, then I gamify it. I make a game out of it, and I make charts. And so on our refrigerator, there's this graphic chart, 5 days. I break it into 5-day windows. I put it on the refrigerator so I can make my children and my wife help me be accountable. I have older kids as well, and you have to get the buy-in from all of them and let them know, hey, I'm on this diet. 2 reasons. Number one, you make me accountable. You see me open the door and pull out a pecan pie, to make me accountable, number one. Number two, to make you accountable. Don't stick a pecan pie in my refrigerator if you know I'm going to open it up. And that's my favorite. So it's kind of taking the group and saying, this is something I'm committed to. I'll write it down. I find if I write it down, put it somewhere to make myself accountable, I'm likely, and I do check boxes. Every day I have 5 or 6 things I have to check through. I put my weight at the top every morning. I wake up, I weigh myself, then I write that number. And then at the end of the day, then I check all 6 or 7 of the items that are my goals for that day. So I built that, and then I made myself accountable. And then I started telling the people around me, hey, be aware, this is what I'm trying to do, because, they can be aware not to go bake a cake or something right in the kitchen when you're starving to death during your fast period,
Yeah, you just dove into a couple of key items. One is how to keep that going on a regular basis, how to put some structure around it. And maybe in the next interview, you could maybe take a picture of it and put it on your computer and we could show it.
Right.
The other thing is getting...
Can I just hold it and kind of look around it like your signature?
Well, you could, but I've got endless grief about that. I finally had to graduate into ScreenFlow. I don't know if you've seen any of the recent.
This isn't our topic, but viewers can listen. But the reality is, in the marketing world, I understand the marketing world, that image is actually helps me identify when I'm scrolling through YouTube and wanting to watch one of your videos as they've been released. That actually allows me to see, oh, there's one right there. So if you went to a professional marketer, they would claim that was well thought out, well planned, well designed way to identify yourself on the internet. Now, you and I both know you're not that smart, but you can this you are. You had this great, brilliant idea of covering up half your face. If it's up to our wives, it would be just this, this down covered up.
You always were a better marketer than me. I wish I had. I wish you'd shared that with me earlier. I might not have made the switch.
I'm not a real good doctor though, so we'll stay in our lanes. How about that?
So yeah, and let's actually start to wrap up. We're for a couple of technical reasons, we're trying to keep the interview short, but if you would, what I'd like for you to do is describe the definition of your diet.
Well, the diet, I'm calling it a intermittent fasting diet, or fasting mimicking diet. I spent a lot of time reading it, talking to you as to how I'd make my choice, but what I broke it down to were, for me, what works. And I think that's the key, is you have to look at yourself and say, what can I accomplish? What can I know that I'll do, that I'll stick with? So first, I put it in 5-day windows. Look, keep it for 5 days, see my success, and then do another 5 days. I always found that if I say I've got this 90-day goal, I'll give up. If I do 5 days, that 6th day, I can do something different and then go back to 5 more days. That's number one. Number two, I list all the things that I know are my worst habits. Sugar is my worst habit. That pecan pie, moon pies, those snacks. So I mark those, what I won't do. I won't drink milk. I love milk. I won't eat sweets, and I won't eat bread. So I just made a list. One of my boxes is what not to do. So what to avoid. And then third is I read different options. So I chose the 16 and 8 rule of fasting, 16 hours in a fast, 7 to 8 hours of eating. So I know that with kids that are in school, that we don't, ideally people say don't eat after 6 o'clock, but that's not coming from anyone who has kids that have homework and then mom has to cook and do all that. So our dinner typically are between 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening. So I said, all right, if 7 o'clock is kind of my end time, somewhere in that hour, and I know I get up at say 6 in the morning, I'll have a cup of coffee and drink a big glass of water and try to drink water during the day. So I'm waiting till about the 1 o'clock hour. In fact, it's 12:43 in the afternoon. I haven't eaten. This is going to be my 4th day of doing this. I haven't eaten, and I feel fine. I mean, it's actually the mornings of about 8 to 10 o'clock that I, start really thinking about a Big Mac or something. But once I kind of get over that hump, I guess maybe your insulin's low or something, and I can stick to it till 1 o'clock. So I did at 1 o'clock. I'll go grab something to eat, and then the next feature of this is I try to eat lean foods and pick a vegetable. So I actually made 2 columns. I made a column of about 6 meats, proteins that I could have, and a column of about 12. And I just try to match those. So I put obviously grilled salmon, chicken, pork chop, and made my list of what I could eat. And then I put Brussels sprouts and asparagus and green beans, and I put that on the list. And so for the last few days, it was easy. I had a lot of leftover turkey. So I took a lot of the leftover turkey and just ate it. And then I made a snack. I don't know if this is good or not, but I made a snack of walnuts and almonds. And I stole a little bit of my neighbor gives me some local honey that they make. So I put a little honey in there in those almonds and walnuts. And that's 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I'm really feel the effect, the headache and other things. I'll eat those almonds and walnuts, handful of those, and then eat supper, a lean piece of fish or protein, and match it with some vegetable. And I actually went through one of the sites that you sent me to and found there's even a score of vegetables, like carrots are higher than broccoli or cauliflower. Yeah. And my wife found this great, say don't eat packaged food, but she found this broccoli that's a broccoli rice and a broccoli potato kind of mix. It's not potato, but like broccoli. I found that's delicious. So not broccoli, excuse me, cauliflower.
Cauliflower,
kind of a cauliflower, mashed cauliflower. So I eat that, and I have that the first few days, that feeling like you're still hungry sometimes, but it comes and goes. I drink some water and try to get my mind on something else the first few days.
Well, I appreciate your time, James, and that's a very helpful description of your diet. I'll call you back in just a few minutes, see if we can get the technology set up, and maybe talk a little bit more about definition, what other folks might call that diet.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Fasting mimicking diet, time restricted feeding, low carb, or what they might call that.
If no one's thought of all of this together, we'll patent it and go sell it.
Sounds good.